Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started with the Finance Committee. So I'd like to call the meeting of the Finance Committee now to order. David, are there any public speakers?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have 4 public speakers today. The first speaker is Jason Pinero, who'll be followed by Murray Bowden.
Good afternoon, Larry and Bob. I'm here to let you guys know that the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is proposing a fare increase to the air train to JFK Airport from $5 to $7.75. I want to request you guys to make an adjustment to the bundle of Long Island Railroad / Air Train to compensate the fare increase that will go into effect next month, believe it or not. And let's make a partnership between hotels in the Penn Station area and the downtown Brooklyn area, because we want more riders to use the Long Island Railroad, and especially those in Brooklyn who benefit from the Atlantic ticket like myself. So instead of paying like $17, we should be paying like $10 to get from Brooklyn to JFK Airport, and not $32 on an Uber or Lyft ride to the airport. But that's all I have to say for this month, and I'll see you guys on CPUC.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Murray Bowden, who'll be followed by Andy Quito.
What keeps coming up over and over and over again is the inability of some people to understand we live in a different world than we grew up in. The rules for transportation, fixing things, scheduling, buses, train horns, crossings have all changed. Some of those rules that were written 50 years ago are obsolete today, and yet we can't stop them from being used. I've done all I can. I have brought to your attention items that are no longer valid. In the regulations, there is a section that says, if it doesn't work, don't use it. Document it with official engineering, but don't do stupid. Too many things around here are being done stupid. It's not safe, it's a waste of money, creates road rage unnecessarily, and old people like me just can't keep up. This business of branding is another language. It's hieroglyphics. You want me to learn a whole new language of hieroglyphics and signs instead of words? My generation grew up with words, not pictures. You create a whole new set of pictures, that's a whole new language for me to learn. I'm a little too old to learn it. It's my grandchildren's responsibility in their lives. And your job is to help them live successfully. I've been here too long.
Please conclude your remarks, Mr. Bowden. Thank you.
I've been here too long. I want to thank all those people who have helped me over the years, because I could not have done it without their education.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Andy Quito, followed by Andrew Pollack.
Good afternoon, MTA Board Finance Committee. My name is Andy Quito, and I'm here because it's concerning me the budget cuts coming very, very soon, and it seems that you guys want to what is it called, like, neglect Jamaica. Want to cut my service? Oh, why? We're already suffering from service unreliability. We got too much people fare invading on my buses in Jamaica. It's full of ghetto. Like no, nothing's being enforced here. Like what is going on? I see people on the trains not even paying the fare when they get on the subway at Jamaica Center, 179, 169, Parsons Boulevard. Where's the police? This is one of the reasons why MTA is losing money because a lack of enforcement from the police, and they want to blame the riders and the workers for this overtime scandal is like a plan to like ruin the workers and my quality of life. Like I come from a low income family and I am still low income, but I need the service. You can't cut service here in Jamaica. No. And please try to be smart and fund projects that are necessary, not like unnecessary projects like you did in the past, like Belmont Park. That spur line causes too much problem on the Long Island Railroad. It just causes too much problem on the mainland. You guys should start planning to build a station on the mainline tracks and abandon the Belmont Park spur line. It's just too unreliable. And also you got to fix up the Atlantic branch. The service is unreliable. It's only half hourly and what did it say? And the stations are neglected. East New York. How about you rebuild East New York Station? That's all I gotta say. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Andrew Pollock.
Last week, the 2020-2024 capital program was unveiled to the public, and this is how I feel regarding the details. Firstly, on the Long Island Railroad, I want to see more switches replaced along the main line. I also want to see east side access completed. I also want to see concrete ties installed between Floral Park and Hicksville for the third track, along with the continued rollout of the M9 fleet. Plus, the upgrade promised for my home station, Jamaica. For one quick point regarding Metro North, I would hope the proposed Penn Station access for the New Haven line will get done. And finally, for New York City Transit, I'm very happy to see the success of CBTC along the 7 and the rollout of the New Flyer Excelsior XD60 buses along the Q12 bus route between Flushing and Little Neck. But let's make sure we can successfully get rid of the Orion 7 old gen buses. I also want to see more modern signals and tracks along the Queens Boulevard line, the second phase of the 2nd Avenue subway expanding to 125th Street in Harlem. And to conclude my remarks, I'm glad Woodhaven Boulevard, Hoyt Skimmerhorn Street, and the Museum of Natural History 81st Street are getting elevators. But why didn't 7th Avenue and West 53rd Street get an elevator after the incident that took place back in January? And I wonder why the underground platforms of Broadway Junction along the A and the C didn't get elevators, yet only the J, L, and Z lines will be getting them. I hope the elevator situation will be reevaluated at the Broadway Junction station. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes the public speaking session.
Thank you. Next, we have the approval of the July 22nd minutes. May I have a motion to approve? Second. All those in favor? Any nays? Minutes are approved. David, can you take us through the work plan, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there's one change to the work plan. MTA Grant Management's action item, resolution to approve the execution, filing, and acceptance of federal funds. The staff summary authorizing the MTA to file for and accept federal grants is deferred from the September board meeting and will be rescheduled to the January 2020 board meeting. There are no other changes to the work plan. Next is Budget Watch. Budget Watch this month focuses on August preliminary operating results and subsidy cash results through September and are measured against the mid-year forecast. Starting with operating results, passenger revenues were favorable in August by $9 million. Subway was $7.8 million favorable, and combined bus for New York City Transit and MTA Bus was $2.7 million favorable. Long Island Railroad was $800,000 favorable on higher non-commutation ridership, while Metro North was $1.2 million unfavorable due to lower ridership on the Hudson and Harlem lines. Year-to-date passenger revenues were $26.6 million favorable. Total revenue was $3.4 million favorable in August and was on target year-to-date. Preliminary expenses for August were $16.8 million unfavorable, reflecting higher labor costs in New York City Transit and Metro North, and were partially offset by higher vacancy savings and higher capital project activity credits to the operating budget at Long Island Railroad, along with controls on non-labor spending throughout the agencies. Higher New York City Transit labor costs reflect SAP-related work, which continues to impact overtime, as well as a change in the timing of booking labor-related expenses to accommodate the recently adopted 5-day close of monthly financials. Metro North's higher labor costs are primarily the result of retroactive wage payments, and year-to-date expenses were $28 million unfavorable and are consistent with the August impacts just noted. Preliminary expenses also reflect overtime, which was $12.3 million unfavorable for August and $36.9 million unfavorable year-to-date, mostly at New York City Transit and due to Subway Action Plan-related work and scheduled maintenance service. MTA bus overtime remains unfavorable to cover maintenance work on buses continuing to run beyond their useful life. New fleet is expected to be delivered starting in the fourth quarter this year. While programmatic information on overspending for August is currently unavailable, more detailed information through July is provided in an overtime detail section on the fourth page of Budget Watch. Debt service costs for August were $18.4 million unfavorable, reflecting the timing of debt service deposits, and year-to-date was $19.3 million favorable, reflecting lower variable rates. Moving to subsidies, total subsidies in September were $34.6 million unfavorable. The payroll mobility tax was just about $27 million unfavorable due to delays in the transmittal of receipts, and the urban tax was $16.7 million unfavorable, reflecting low total transactional values. Partially offsetting these were favorable results of $2.7 million for the petroleum business tax and $5.4 million for the mortgage recording tax. MTOA, MTA aid, and the for-hire vehicle surcharge were on target. Year-to-date through September, subsidies were $17.5 million unfavorable, the result of the PMT timing delay, which was partially offset by favorable PBT and MRT results. Overall, preliminary year-to-date results were on target, favorable by $1.1 million. Are there any questions?
One question. You made a point of talking about buses that have outlived their normal life and are being kept in service, but you didn't mention trains as well, and we have several of those car types, R32s, R42s, probably M3s on the railroad. I mean, there's a lot of rolling stock that's also here much longer than it was supposed to have been.
That's true. The MTA bus overtime is specifically to keep those buses rolling.
I see.
There's a lot of repair work and maintenance work that's going on that's above and beyond what they would have expected.
And wouldn't repair work and overtime be required for some of these rolling stock that's well beyond its useful life as well?
It would be, and under overtime and under New York City Transit, there's scheduled maintenance service work, and that's rolled into that.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions by any board member? If not, we need a motion. Oh,
No motion for Budget Watch.
sorry.
It's okay. The next item is Finance Watch. It can be found in Section 5, page 25, and Pat McCoy will take us through it.
Okay. Good afternoon. So we just have a few transactions to report in Finance Watch this month. Mid-August, August 14th, we priced $422 million of transportation revenue green bonds, and these paid off a ban, the 2018A bond anticipation note or ban. This transaction had an all-in true interest cost of 3.387%, and that closed successfully as we articulated in my email to you on this one. On September 6th, we issued $1.2 billion of transportation revenue bans or notes for new money proceeds to finance existing approved transit and commuter projects. We broke the notes into two subseries, $1 billion for all MTA-related funded projects and $200 million to address the state funding commitment for the 15 to 19 capital program. We're segregating those bans separately for the state to take out. And as you can see here in your Finance Watch, all the winning bids are listed there by the firm that submitted those bids. Most recently, we issued $102 million of TBTA refunding bonds. These are taxable refunding bonds. These were priced last week, and they'll close on Wednesday. This transaction had a true interest cost of 3.48% and has a final maturity of December 31st, 2044. And we issued on a taxable basis to re-amortize the debt. You'll see we have a couple of the our ULSD fuel hedges that we reported here. July 30th, we executed 2.8 million ULSD fuel hedge at $1.88 a gallon. And then on August 27th, another 2.8 million gallons at $1.77.9 per gallon. And so that's just our normal update on fuel hedging. So that concludes Finance Watch. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, next we move on to MTHQ and all agency items. There are 2 action items, and Pat McCoy is here to answer questions if there are any. The first action item is seeking approval of the Finance Committee and the TBTA Board for a resolution authorizing the submission of the proposed payroll mobility tax obligation resolution to the MTA Capital Program Review Board for its review and approval.
In your exhibit packet, you'll see both of these resolutions. They're rather lengthy documents appearing in the exhibit book. But just to recap what we're asking for, we're seeking, in the case of the payroll mobility tax obligation resolution, we're seeking authorization of the resolution itself, which will essentially allow us to issue bonds against the payroll mobility tax, the aid trust account monies, and the payroll mobility tax replacement monies provided by the state. This does need to go to the Capital Program Review Board for approval. And this, again, just to recap for members, the payroll mobility tax was authorized by the state in 2009, and we first introduced the idea of a resolution in 2013. So we're continuing to be hopeful that this will ultimately win approval. We've structured a credit that we believe will achieve high AA credit ratings from all the rating agencies, and we're looking forward to introducing this to our portfolio. The second matter is the securitization, the issuance of bonds against the statewide and citywide sales taxes that were approved by the legislature and approved by the governor this past legislative season. These revenues are an important funding source for the 2020 to 2024 capital program, and we anticipate at a minimum of a $5 billion can be achieved by issuing bonds against these revenues. Obviously, there's a lot of information around the resolutions, but I'd be happy to take any questions you have.
Any questions by any board member? If not, can I have I'm sorry, Rhonda, I thought you were going to ask a question. If not, can I have a motion to approve? Second? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just read the second resolution. You need to vote on that also. The second action item is requesting the Finance Committee and the TBTA Board to approve a resolution authorizing the submission of the proposed special obligation resolution authorizing sales tax revenue obligations, statewide and citywide sales tax, to the MTA Capital Program Review Board for its review and approval. And that'll need a vote also, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, you read it, right? I thought we approved both. Any questions? Motion? Second? All those in favor? Nays? Motion carried.
There are 6 reports and information items. First, Patrick Warren and Michelle Woods are here to give a brief report on the Overtime Task Force and the implementation of the Morrison and Foster recommendations.
Patrick, before you get started, if you can do a couple of things just in terms of the next meeting, because I got some of the material in advance that I requested. I think it would be helpful to the committee on a going forward basis if we could have more information on the spreadsheet. If you take a look at the Subway Action Plan dashboard that I had a hand in putting together, I'm not saying that because I'm trying to get credit for anything. there was a lot of specificity in terms of, progress, right? Goals and objectives, how far along, what percentage of progress was made, but also to prioritize all the recommendations that were in the Kerry Cohen's report. Not everything is of equal importance. Obviously, some things are probably either more important that we have to focus on, either because they'll generate greater savings or greater accountability. So I just want to kind of prioritize things, but also give the committee a better sense of how to track and monitor the progress by using the dashboard as a tool, and then use it to ask you questions on a going forward basis, because obviously the second document is much more in detail, but it would be easier if we see on a spreadsheet on how this is all kind of coming together and working, and that would be helpful, okay?
Sure. Will do. Chair, regarding overtime, a task force was established to implement the recommendations of the Morrison-Forrester report, which is about time, attendance, and overtime. The task force is led by myself, Chief Safety Officer, and to my right, the MTA Deputy Auditor General, Michelle Woods. And that, by the way, answers one of the recommendations within the Morrison-Forrester report. What we've done is we've divided the task force up into 5 working groups. The working groups are along these lines: policy, oversight, reporting, optimization, and systems hardware and software. Each group includes members from each of the various agencies and from the headquarters staff, and the working groups have already begun to meet. The task force will initially follow the timeline set out in the Morrison-Forrester report, and any deviations from that will be approved by the chairman. Lastly, we'll say that the task force will meet formally every 2 weeks going forward, and we'll give reports out to the chairman and managing director, as well as to Michelle and myself, and then we'll also provide routine reports to this board.
And I just want to emphasize, I would appreciate it if you would talk to the Inspector General and figure out a process to include her office in some kind of monitoring type capacity, because since her office has been involved over the years regarding various overtime type issues, I want to make sure that she's part of the process on how we implement these reforms. I think for the Finance Committee, addressing this issue is one of our top priorities. When you think about the fact that $1.3 billion is budgeted in the operating budget for overtime, and what we've seen double-digit year-over-year increases, at least for the last 3 years. I mean, some of the findings from the consultant, I think, concerned all of us on this committee, as well as probably the entire board, in terms of there was some significant management deficiencies or management flaws that without correcting them, you can't even then go step 2, step 3, step 4, and seeing whether or not there are any other problems behind the curtain, because you don't have the data to be able to evaluate whether or not how deep a problem is or isn't. And the fact that we're still in a paper environment when it's 2019, 2020 was also troubling. So one is creating a more granular, a dashboard with a lot more specificity that shows the goals and objectives, but how far in the process of hitting the goal you are, and some priority of what you're addressing, what's the most important things to address first, the least important last, would be very helpful to the committee.
Again, we'll do that, and to your first point about the Inspector General, we have met with her and her team already, so we'll continue down the vein you described.
All right, Commissioner Lacewell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Consistent with your remarks, I would simply ask, there's some reference here to timeliness and what happens if deadlines can't be achieved. I just would like to emphasize that I think we should be clear that time is of the essence. This is a very important problem, and although understandably sometimes something can happen, I think the presumption should be that timeliness will be met, and if it looks like it's not going to be met, somebody should get help, rather than the way it's articulated here, at least, it implies, we just get an extension. Thank you.
Commissioner Lynn?
Thank you. Clearly, the issue of overtime has been an extraordinarily important topic, and one that has led to lots of fireworks since I became involved before I became a board member in June, and clearly followed what was in the paper and listened carefully to the various discussions that went on the board before I attended. I also was not able to be in town in August for the meeting, but carefully listened to the almost 3 hours of the session to hear what happened. And I have some serious concerns, and they perhaps are best stated by Neil Zuckerman's question that he asked in August, which is, he said, tell me, he went through the various budgetary problems that the MTA is facing, and he said, how is overtime recommendations that you're suggesting, he said to the consultants, how to translate financially into closing the gap? We have $500 million. How much, by implementing your recommendations, would that lower the shortfall? And the response of Kerry Cohn at that time was very difficult to tell. We don't have enough of the metrics to know about it. I must admit, having been involved in overtime issues most of my professional career, one thing you generally do know very well is the level of overtime and where it is, because as opposed to most payrolls that can be negative payrolls and that you have to, that get paid automatically, overtime you have to put in for overtime in order to get paid. And employees are very careful about making sure that they put in for overtime. And when we say, when Bob Ferrand says it's 1.4 billion as the numbers that have been used, it's based on the actuals. It's not a theoretical, it's an actual. So we have a lot of information on overtime. And I think it's wrong to sort of have this assumption, oh, we're just sort of making all these numbers up. We know lots and lots about overtime. And it's fascinating when I see the Budget Watch numbers where you say that, look, New York City Transit is 36 million worse in fiscal 19, calendar 19. But then it's explained that the 36 million is largely because of various programs of Fast Forward, various programs that justify it. So it's not that people aren't putting in the right papers or not getting it recorded properly. It's just the opposite. People are recording it, and people are acknowledging, look, these are based on specific programs. So I think it is critical to have much greater granularity and knowledge about what we're talking about. I've been saying this in this area, and I'm sure I'll make the same comments, similar comments in the fare evasion issue. We can always speak generally. You can always speak anecdotally. I think it is interesting, of the 1.4 billion, what is the number that we think that the Kerry Cohn report is going to impact? Are we talking about millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars? My guess is we're certainly not talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. But we need to know that. And we need to, and I will follow up on your dashboard concept, we need to split these things. There's overtime that is based on availability of employees, and there are issues that could be talked about in collective bargaining on availability. There are issues involved in specific programs where we haven't hired enough people, and there's overtime that directs that. There is some, probably small number, that is based on record keeping, but I don't know the answer. And I don't want to speculate what the number is. I think we owe it to the workforce, we owe it to the public, to be able to say of this 1.4 billion, here is how it shapes up. And that we believe that the implementation of the Kerry Cohn policy will save X million dollars. And here's the reason. And this one might save 1 million, this one 300,000. I have no idea what the numbers are. But we need to lay them out. I think that there has been so much upset about this issue, so much discussion in a very sort of loud and upset way, that we owe it to everybody to define exactly where the dollars are coming from and what it is that we're doing and not speak generally, but speak specifically.
Commissioner, it would be hard to disagree with any of your comments. Clearly, I mean, part of the problem is there's a lot that nobody just knows. Is like with the fact that there aren't the proper systems in place, there hasn't been the proper training of supervisors, there hasn't been a red flag system put in place, and enough checks and balances. I agree with you. We need to get to a real number. It can't be just that it's overtime based on the subway action plan. That's some of it, or other important capital projects. And some of it's legitimate when you're having hiring freeze and you're using overtime rather than necessarily hiring. You can debate whether or not that's a prudent way to go versus hiring new employees. But to your point, and Bob, I would ask, and I'm prepared to work with you, I think it's incumbent before the operating budget comes out that your team really do a hard scrubbing so you can come back to not only the finance committee but the entire board and convince us and give us confidence that the overtime number for the 2020 calendar year is a real number that can be backed up and substantiated on some kind of factual basis rather than just arbitrarily assigning a 5 or 10% increase year over year or whatever the number is. We need to feel the number is just too big. You have a 10% increase year over year. It's $130 million if my math is correct. I'll defer to Mr. Mahiga if my math was off. That's a huge number, and you can just have countless things you could come up with on what that money could be used for, or that money could be used to prevent a reduction in service or something like that. So I think it's critical that we really kind of figure out how to, while all these changes and reforms are going on, to create better accountability, that we figure this out. It's too big a number and it's too important to the operating budget that we not, to Commissioner Lynn's issues that he's raised, not have confidence in the number that we're going to approve in the overall budget.
Yeah, we will give additional scrutiny to this number, but as you mentioned, much of what is being done by the task force is going to help inform us as we go forward, or help us corral, marshal, coordinate our efforts. So we will give it extra scrutiny for this budget cycle, but we do look forward to see how the recommendations are implemented and how they give us the tools that we need to really do this properly on a longer-term basis.
The second item is the 2020 preliminary budget, July financial plan 2020 to 2023. In order to give the public the opportunity to address any issues associated with the July financial plan, this item was included on the agenda. The third and fourth items are the draft consolidated financial statement for the 3 months ending March 31st and the 6 months ending June 31st, 2019. It's available in the exhibition book and on mta.info. Please note that the drafts of the consolidated financial statements will be presented and voted on at the Audit Committee meeting this coming Wednesday. The fifth item is the agency reports on fare evasion, which begin on page 47. Susan Doring from Metro North, Mark Young from Long Island Railroad, and Tim Mulligan from New York City Transit are here to provide brief reports. And then, along with Patrick Warren, we'll answer any questions you have on fare evasion reduction efforts.
Good afternoon.
Well, before we do that, Andy or Tim, I just want to address, I reviewed a copy of a letter, and again, let me take a step back. This is more about fact-finding and gathering information. My intention here is not to be accusatory or anything else. But I had received a copy of a letter from the Office of Inspector General that was dated July 2nd to Tim regarding a audit that they did on fare evasion, right? And in that letter, they raised a number of issues or concerns. They listed quite a few recommendations. There were questions about data collection, questions about survey methodology, and on and on and on. And clearly, there was a response letter from Tim. Here's my concern. I don't want to go through all this specificity. I believe all board members had received a copy of this letter, whether they've had a chance to review it or not. I did. Because fare evasion has been something along with other members, have talked about for the last year. One is, I want to make sure just going forward that when agencies are having audits done by the Inspector General's office, they share that with us. I'm not aware. I wasn't aware that this was going on. I don't know if anybody else on the Finance Committee or any other board knew it was going on. It was an investigation, so it's not like you have to keep it a secret. So I appreciate if you could just let us know. Two is, I want to make sure that different units within the agency don't communicate with each other via email or text messaging, that on something of this importance, that Tim, you and your team, along with the Inspector General's team, sit down and go through all this stuff in detail, as opposed to back and forth emails. Because I think the only thing that I'm really interested in, I think most of the committee members are interested in, I'm not going to speak for them, they could speak for themselves. We just want to get to the bottom of it. We want to fix the problem. We want to minimize fare evasion revenue loss, right? And I don't want to be here as chair of the committee questioning the information or the data that you provide the committee as to its, completeness or its accuracy. I mean, one of the things they mentioned that, from the 2018 data they looked at, as well as some of the 2017 data, there wasn't necessarily enough transit checkers, right? So it's hard to, they have to look at a lot of different things. It's one individual, they can't look at everything. And again, there were issues regarding data collection. There was questions about sampling methodology. I know that changes have been made by New York City Transit since this issue first came to light in December of 18 on how bad it was, but I don't know whether or not the changes that New York City Transit made are the same recommendations that the Office of Inspector General made. I'm not here to opine that office's recommendations all should be adopted, or whether any should be adopted, or they should be adopted in some other format. But I think there should be a meeting of the minds where the two organizations can come back jointly and tell us what was discussed, what was agreed to, what is going to be implemented, when it will be implemented, just to give us the highest level of confidence that whatever information you're sharing with us, is as accurate as anything could be, because we're all comfortable that the methodology that you're using, the data collection, the whatever, is accurate. I understand you can't sit there, be on every bus, be in every subway station. I get that, right? But, the private sector, the public sector, all uses sampling as a methodology. And there's a lot of different ways to do sampling. And there's always a lot of criticism and second guessing on what's the right methodology, right? And what's the right sample size. We can't afford to get it wrong based on the current situation that we're dealing with. So I want to give you an opportunity to kind of respond to what I'm doing, but I just want to make sure that you and the Office of the Inspector General get together and come back to us in October and let us know where things stand between her audit and findings and what your shop has done and is doing and when it will be doing it, because it was hard to follow between her findings and recommendations and your response as to what's really going on and whether or not we're implementing and instituting the right measures. Okay?
Yeah, I completely understand your expectation. The letter from the Inspector General's office was extensive. They had a number of observations and suggestions that we welcome and are helpful. Some of those we are aware of before and we're already working on mitigating. Others were new and we've come up with measures to mitigate, but I think it's a good idea to reconcile the changes and improvements we've made in the spirit of exactly what you said, of getting the best possible accuracy from a sampling methodology, which is not a count, it's not scientific, we're not spending millions and millions of dollars, but to get the best numbers we can with the process we have and the improvements that we're in the process of making. So we'll do that.
And I'll get to you in a second, Commissioner Jones. You understand and can appreciate the fact that the issue is so problematic that if the number was even worse than what we believe it to be because of poor sampling methodology or sampling errors, it would kind of put us even more on our heels than we currently are. So that's why I'm just emphasizing, and quite frankly, if we needed to spend some money by bringing in, you have a genius conference on other things, there's geniuses on how to really do accurate sampling and how to collect data. For the amount of money we're losing in fair evasion revenue, I would be fully supportive of making sure that whatever resources or support within reason that we need, that we get the help that staff would need, working with the Inspector General's office to improve our sampling methodologies to make sure that, again, the numbers that you guys are providing are as accurate as they can possibly be. Commissioner Jones?
I don't want to beat a dead horse. Again, equity is very important to me. There's some tendency to, as one of the police people told me, we generally go where the crime is, and it tends to skew some of these results. I don't want us to replicate some of those biases, since fair evasion, at least anecdotally as I see it, is much more pervasive than we had originally thought. It's not limited only to poor communities, it's in more well-to-do communities, it's on buses. So yeah, I would just echo this, that I don't want to repeat some of the mistakes of assumption as to where fair evasion is most concentrated.
Absolutely, and our sampling is done on a randomized basis. So we do not choose which locations we're going to over the course of the quarter. Those are randomly generated throughout the course of the week, throughout the course of the day, so that we get a truly randomized sample of our extensive system for that and other reasons.
Commissioner Lacewell?
Thank you, Larry. Your comment reminds me, I believe, that the Inspector General previously agreed at the request of the board to come back and brief us periodically, perhaps in consultation with Pat. The next board meeting could be a time to do that. I think that'll be about 3 months from when we heard from her.
I believe the Inspector General is scheduled to appear before the board at Wednesday's board meeting.
Okay.
So
great.
Clearly, everyone will have an opportunity to bring things up, even if she doesn't discuss them
Thanks, Larry.
herself.
Okay.
Huh? Yes.
Okay, I'll comment after I hear that.
I just wanted to
Yes.
bring this up front rather than wait till after they did the report, because, again, I'm just concerned that the data that the committee's been getting each month, I want to make sure that, we're not getting accurate data. I don't want to be in a position where we're not getting accurate data because of problems with not enough checkers, or there's sampling issues or data collection issues. And if there are, fine, then let's just be transparent and bring them to our attention so we know what we're dealing with, as opposed to thinking we're going down a certain path and then find out 6 months, a year later, the path has changed on us. That's what I'm concerned about. Go ahead, Tim.
So there's two reports in your materials. The second quarter report, which is included on a quarterly basis, the subway fare evasion rate was 3.9%, which is no change over the first quarter of 19. The bus fare evasion rate combined for SBS and local buses was 25.3%. On the Finance Committee report, the fare evasion rate July year to date was a bit higher than that, 4.3%, 0.4 of a percentage point higher. And the bus rate was somewhat lower, 22.9%, reflecting the effect of the marginal effect of the additional month of July.
Okay. Does Metro North and Long Island Railroad want to?
Certainly. Mark and I are going to sort of tag team because a lot of the initiatives that we have are going on both railroads. So I'm going to start out by talking about the revenue collection on board the trains. Both Metro North and Long Island Railroad have worked closely with MTA Audit to further enhance the onboard revenue compliance program by doubling the sample size of revenue collection audits performed by MTA Audit, followed by a comprehensive review and follow-up by Metro North and Long Island Railroad transportation managers. MTA Audit performs two types of audits for us: fare not collected and incorrect fare. Fare not collected audits test the collection of all types of one-way tickets. The percent of loss therefore reflects this portion of revenue, not the entire percentage of total revenue collected. Incorrect fare collected is a measure of a specific type of test and is also not based on the entire population of ticket types and ticket collection. Both railroads have requested these specific tests based on the individual operating conditions at each railroad, focused on the areas of greatest risk. At Metro North in July, MTA Audit conducted 397 total tests during the course of 294 train rides. In August, MTA Audit conducted 595 total tests during the course of 443 rides. Metro North's fare not collected rate in July was 4.1%, down from 6.0% last year. In August, it was 5.4%, down from 7.3% in August of last year. Year-to-date, fare not collected is 4.5%, up from 3.1% year-to-date in 2018. Fare not collected represents 2.35% of total revenue year-to-date through the end of August. Metro North's incorrect fare rate in July was 18.5%, up from 16.2% last year. In August, incorrect fare was 17.1%, up from 11.6%. Incorrect fares are 17.3% year-to-date. Revenue loss associated with this test is estimated to be 0.22% of total revenue year-to-date through the end of August. Each month, Metro North's transportation managers investigate every exception identified in these audits and responds to MTA audit services within 5 days of receipt of the audit results. A review by the Metro North Operating Department of each of the 36 fare not collected failures for July and August indicated 11 were likely unavoidable due to operating conditions at the time. Examples of those exceptions include the previous train was canceled, requiring extra station stops and crowding conditions, making it difficult to get through the train. Conductor was assisting with onboard disturbance in another car, things of that nature. Each month, all employees identified in a failed audit are Additionally, transportation managers perform follow-up inspections of employees identified in these missed fare incidents to ensure future compliance. Further, Metro-North's Passenger Revenue Accounting Department reviews conductor remittance data each month to look for variances in revenue collection on board trains. In the event discrepancies are found, the crew member is brought in for a full audit, and performance issues that are found are handled appropriately. And lastly, Metro-North has recently reached out to MTA Audit to explore the use of MTA Audit software to identify e-tics purchasing, refund, and activation trends, anomalies, and potential misuse of this ticketing tool. Mark is going to talk about credit card fraud.
Sure.
Before we go, just one.
Commissioner Jones?
Can you give me a dollar amount rather than just the percentage of how much we're assuming was lost?
I can.
I think I'm not good at percentages. Never was, even in grade school.
I understand. So Metro-North's fare not collected year-to-date is estimated at about $11.5 million.
Okay.
And
That's an annual number?
that's not an annual. That's through the end of August.
So annualized, you think the number is
So
what?
annualize
20
that.
million?
I'm not good at doing math, maybe about 15, 16.
Okay.
The incorrect fare rate is about $1 million year-to-date, so probably
so
$1 million.
17
Yes,
for the total. Okay.
yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner Metzinger.
Perhaps I should have told you that in the joint railroad meeting, we did have some issues and wanted to discuss fare evasion, but recognizing that you were going to have this presentation, we kind of shut those questions down, so I expect you may hear them now. And one of them was the amount of money we were working with here.
Yeah, and I've also, Commissioner, have made the suggestion and offer that if both you and Commissioner Law in the Joint Railroads Committee, and if Commissioner Feinberg, if she believes it would be more productive and useful to bring up fare evasion in your respective committees rather than bring it up here in finance, I'm happy to do that. I'm certainly not looking to duplicate efforts so the agencies have to come in and repeat themselves more than once. So originally I just did it here because it's money and it's finance, but I'm happy to work with the three chairs, and if there's a more efficient way of doing this.
Mr. Chairman, I think that since we're still working on the procedure to be used to make our estimates, it's appropriate here, and when it becomes, when it's clear and we're sure we've got our hands around it, then I think it's appropriate to go into committee.
Just to report on the Long Island Railroad figures that Sue reported on behalf of Metro North, we follow the same management process, a very similar oversight process. For Long Island Railroad for the month of August, the auditors did 337 observations, and they uncovered 19 cases of fare not collected, and separate observations, 76 on incorrect fare collected, of which they uncovered 13 instances of incorrect fare collected. What we found when we do these reviews is at Long Island Railroad, most of the issues are between Penn and Jamaica, which is a fast run, a lot of passengers on board, and several stations close together. So our management team is constantly looking to redeploy the extra collectors we have to address those concerns. Fortunately, if you looked at when you look at the data, you see our management attention year-to-date has produced some results. Year-to-date through this point last year, we had a 7.3% fare not collected rate. It's 5.8% at this point this year. On the incorrect fare collected rate, it's fairly consistent, 18.2% this year versus 17.9% last year. As I've mentioned one or two times before in this setting, one of our challenges with the incorrect fare collected rate is Atlantic Ticket and ensuring that it's being used properly. We have undertaken several procedures to address that. At least on the positive side, if you look at the graph in the report, you'll see over the last 3 months, we saw a dramatic reduction in the incorrect fare collected rate. So that was a positive. As far as the raw number, every month we take these numbers and incorporate them into a new revenue loss estimate for the Long Island Railroad. So it changes as the rate changes. Year to date, we have a different number, but our range at Long Island Railroad is between 25 and 30 million per year.
Commissioner Alpert?
Thank you. Tim, on the random observations that are done on transit for fare evasion, how long is each particular location surveyed?
For an hour, the observation's an hour long.
And how many times do you go back, does a person go back to that particular location and survey again? Or is
So-
that just a one time and then you choose another location?
It's, as I said, it's selected randomly from all the different stations and all the individual fare arrays, because as you're familiar, some stations have
Yep.
fewer fare arrays than others. So it depends on the random generation, but we're doing, hundreds of stations or over 100 routes per quarter that go into that estimate.
And you're looking at both attended and non-attended locations?
Yes, there's in our methodology, there's a minimum criteria for very lightly used fare arrays that, under a certain threshold of use that aren't in the mix for the randomization. But of the active fare arrays, we're looking at all the fare arrays that are in that selection mix.
Are you also looking at turnstile, either jumping or going under versus entering through slam gates?
Yes, and when I reported on the fare evasion numbers initially last November, we broke those out, and as we reported at the time, and I believe it's still the case now with these numbers, that the slam gate is a bigger issue than people jumping over the turnstile.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lynn?
So I'm going to go back to the general theme that I've been having all along, which is that you need well-analyzed granular data to come up with an approach to how to deal with a problem. And I think that we tend to jump very quickly to a solution without appropriately analyzing the data. So what is new today is we now know if we use Tim's $265 million estimate, which is perhaps low, and we use the 45 to 50 million number that we just heard, that we're losing at least $315 million annually in fares. If we use the data that Tim produced in terms of breakdown, buses and subways, where I think his numbers were about 45% on subways, 55% on buses, we come up with what I thought was an extraordinary number, that only about a third of the lost revenue is coming from subways. Say that again, only a third of the lost revenue is coming from subways. I don't think anyone sitting around this table would have guessed that before we started looking at hard data. Almost half of the lost revenues are coming from buses. That suggests perhaps a much different strategy than if we're losing $265 million at the turnstile. And I think that we have to sit back and we don't rush to say this is what the issue is and this is how we fix it. We need to look at the data, analyze it, and then come up with a solution that is pointed towards the data. I don't see how you solve a problem without knowing granularly what the problem is. I don't see how you know whether you've done something successfully when you've brought in either bridge and tunnel collectors doing fare evasion, cops doing fare evasion, whatever you do, unless you know the baseline of what's happening at each location, you can't possibly know whether you've solved it or not. So I want to continue this theme. I caution us to start with data and analysis and then come up with solutions, not announce for the PR what the solution is and then figure out whether the data works.
I think if you go back to November, we highlighted that the buses, which was a much bigger issue both for dollars and for the evasion rate. That has consistently been a theme of our reporting. So, we are continuing to analyze the data. We are continuing to improve our methods of calculating both the revenue loss as well as the methodology associated with the rate. But it's no surprise that the buses account for a much bigger portion of the revenue loss than subways. Subways rate is much smaller, but its ridership is higher, but the rate on buses is significantly higher to make up for the smaller denominator of the ridership.
And if I might just add to that, Mr. Chairman, that I'm not saying I flagged this because I did not, but I think it's kind of obvious or it's intuitive to me, and I've seen it elsewhere that buses does tend to have a higher evasion rate. I mean, even though our stations are nowhere near as to the earlier discussion, Chair, that you initiated, they're not as near as secure as they need to be. I'd like to see cameras on every vehicle, every bus, every train, every station, on all the gate lines. That's certainly the case elsewhere, and we will get there with modern vehicle acquisition and with retrofitting of stations. I just think the station is typically a more inherently secure environment. You're more likely, until recently, to run into a cop. You're more likely to be covered by a camera. The bus is a point of vulnerability for us, and that's why we have, of late, been putting effort into closing that gap, and we're beginning to see some results.
I do also, just Commissioner Lynn, in fairness to New York City Transit, and I've in the past have been tough with them. I do think that when we had that day of reckoning or eye-opening back in December of 2018 and saw how big the problem was, because once upon a time we thought that the loss of revenue was because of a decline in ridership, and I think everybody on the board was a little skeptical of that viewpoint. But nothing happens immediately, and I think the fact that New York City's Transit, to the best of their ability, started putting together a plan to try to address the problems of fare evasion, both on the bus system as well as the subway system. I think that's led to initiatives that we've been able to accomplish this year, like negotiate moving the police officers from TBTA over to help address the bus fare evasion problem and moving around resources. So while we all want this to happen as quickly as possible and sooner rather than later, it took months to negotiate getting those officers transferred over, but it's been done. So hopefully, while we need to continue to come up with solutions based on the data that we have, I think we couldn't afford to wait. And as you can see, the problem has only exacerbated itself, so we need to just continue to have all hands on deck here to push back on it. Commissioner Vanderpool and then Commissioner Feinberg.
Commissioner Lynn's comment reminded me that he had asked a few months ago for specific data as to the breakdown of fare evaders, whether what percentage might be students, what percentage might be those who are older adults, etc. Has that granular level of analysis, can that be undertaken, and has it?
We put together a bunch of data in response to Commissioner Lynn's request. And I think we're in the process, Patrick, of scheduling a follow-up meeting to sort of discuss that. To the question of how many people are seniors, how many people are students, our field observations can't ascertain that information. Obviously, someone that's positioned at a fairway and is counting the number of people going through a gate and keeping track of who swiped or who went to the station agent to get the gate buzzed in before they walk through the gate. It's very hard to accurately assess people with backpacks and whether they're 23 years old or whether they're 13. So, we don't have an accurate count of students. We have utilized the information we have about student Metro cards and about the change in student enrollment over time and the change in the paid ridership of students to get the best approximation we have that we apply to our calculation of revenues, because we, discount out what the portion of fare evasion we believe is associated with student ridership out of the revenue loss calculation to the best of our ability. But we don't have that granular because we just can't observe people's ages or occupations accurately.
Tim, do you, you may have said this, and I had to step out for a minute. Are the observers who are in the stations watching folks come in and out, are they wearing MTA paraphernalia, whether it's a vest or a shirt or whatever?
They are not.
Okay.
In the past, and one of the issues that, as we went through the entire system and tried to make improvements beginning last fall, in the past, occasionally they were, because if they had been scheduled to do passenger environmental survey work as part of their shift and fare evasion field sampling as another part of their shift, they wore a uniform in the first context and not the latter. But now we have dedicated staff. They're not wearing uniforms. They're not carrying clipboards. They utilize an electronic pad, and they try and observe as discreetly as possible. Although clearly their mere presence may affect the counts that they see, because it's not inconceivable that someone may say, oh, wow, there's someone watching the fare array who's touching their pad. So, as we disclosed when we first came out with the numbers last fall, with a lot of, like any other human activity, if anything, the bias is towards an undercount, which confirms what the chair had said.
Okay, and again, sorry if I missed this. Are you familiar with how other systems try to estimate fare evasion? So Chicago or DC or Boston or whatever.
Yes, we've done some benchmarking around the techniques for fare evasion, and we are well positioned among our peers. A lot of systems don't attempt at all to quantify fare evasion in any serious way. Some rely on sort of self-reports of either station personnel or bus operators to sort of make an estimate or record in real time fare evasion. Some do sampling. Most that do sampling on a far less frequent basis than we do. They go out on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis or twice a year and do a sample and extrapolate from that sample for an annual rate. We're one of the only systems that is out there really 24/7, 7 days a week, trying to come up with a statistically valid sample. There is at least one system internationally which utilizes technology to get an electronic estimate, and we're certainly, with the increased use of cameras, we're trying to utilize our camera technology more aggressively, both to have our samplers watch video, also to use video of when our samplers are out there as a QC monitoring device, so that we can look at the same hour that the sample was taken and have a second person make the same count at the same fare array to check to see how accurate we are for QC purposes and for internal audit purposes. So, and as we move to having the potential of video analytic capability that could potentially distinguish between people that are paying and not paying, going through both the fare arrays and the gate, we'll be increasingly trying to move to a more aggressive use of technology to both improve the count and reduce the costs associated with getting accurate data.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. I'm not even sure that having the perfect count is necessarily what we're looking for here, because we probably put so many resources into video that would allow us to have the perfect count. Your investment ends up offsetting what you would get back anyway. But I appreciate your comments, because that's what I believed, was that we're not perfect. Our count won't be perfect, but we're basically best, from my understanding, as I've looked into this, best in class in the country in terms of how we're counting and what we're doing. And we've got some ways to go. Like, we have to improve. Your comment on, we used to have folks who were wearing MTA vests counting, it makes sense that we're no longer doing that. So we've got a ways to go. But that was my sense too, that to the extent that we're to the extent that we're compiling data, it's generally as good as there is in the country. Thanks.
Commissioner Lin?
Maybe I think this is a question really for you, Andy. It seems to me that we are particularly vulnerable in New York, having a combination of no exit swipe and open exit doors. Just having been in Washington Metro over the weekend and enjoying London and your system in London, it seems to me that we're just asking for trouble in the way we're organized. And I'm wondering whether the count is almost less important in comparison to figuring out those two major vulnerabilities we have, which is no one demonstrates that they've paid when they leave, and they can walk through an open door that others often hold open. So let me get your thoughts on that.
Certainly. And as you know, my background is the Tube and various other places. So the big advantage that the London Underground has, because it is a zonal system, the last count, I think there's 8 zones, used to be 6 back in my day, but it's done on a geographic basis, is that with their equivalent of Omni, which is called Oyster, you must tap in and you must tap out. And you're heavily incentivized to tap out, because if you don't tap out, say, for example, the gate is open or you decide to sort of sneak out, you will automatically on your Oyster card be debited the highest possible amount. Even if you snuck out in a Zone 1 station, the system will assume that you went all the way out to Amersham or somewhere out in Zone 8, and you'll only do that once because it will cost you a fortune. So that is an advantage. The other advantage is the so-called ring of steel on the Tube, where you have gates, including wide gates. There isn't a secondary exit gate like what we have. I can't say I've ever seen that apart from here. And I think what's on the TTC as well in Toronto. But we have that here for code purposes. So in order that you can evacuate a station platform within a set period, and that period is defined by code, that is meant to be a means of egress, not entry, obviously. But it is a point of vulnerability, because all that someone has to do is push it, and while they're coming out, a whole bunch of people can come in, or you actually see them open it for people. You don't have that on the Tube. You have the gate arrays tend to be much bigger. So in some cases they have the advantage that the platform, the actual envelope is bigger, so you've got more space. So the gate array typically is longer. But there's also a wide gate, which is also paddle operated rather than a turnstile. So you tap on the reader, even in a wheelchair, and you can get into the system through a wide gate. You don't have this rather humiliating arrangement we have, whereby someone in a wheelchair has to go over to the gate, and then be asked to have the gate released, go in. There's quite a lot of deficiencies. So what are we doing about it? I've already got my team for an accessibility purposes, where we are going to trial a wide gate, albeit it will be in mock-up form. More on that to be announced at next month's TAC, Transit Committee. But we do still need to be mindful of the issues around egress. The other hope on the horizon, I guess, is with Omni, at least, albeit we still won't have tap out, at least with Omni, we will eventually be able to say, if the take-up is great, inspectors will be able to see on your Omni card, have you tapped it? We still will have the vulnerability of someone might have tapped and let a whole bunch of people in, but on a on a prepaid card. But where we've got to get to, slightly long-winded answer, is a high percentage that you'll get checked, and a nasty fine if you are found not to have paid or not to have paid the right amount. Right amount's less relevant here, it's a flat fare, but that is typically how transit companies crack this issue. Because what you really want to do is, and to Commissioner Jones's point, you're not after the people who really can't afford it. There should be other mechanisms for them, and we have fair fares. We need to up the take-up. The absolute hardcore recidivists, it doesn't matter how much, what kind of system you have, they ain't paying. They philosophically don't want to pay. They don't agree it should be a free railway or whatever. They need to be dealt with in a different way. What you're really looking for is to target the middle chunk, the chancers. Might be even someone in a suit who can afford it, but happens to notice the gate is open. And they didn't set out to maybe fiddle the fare that day, but they're taking a chance. They will take less of a chance if the chance of getting checked is pretty high. the consequences of being found not to have paid the right fare is hefty. So that's where I think we need to get to, and we can learn from other systems in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
The final information item is the as-needed consultant report on page 57, and David Ross is here to take any questions. Okay, with no questions, next is David Ross with procurements for headquarters in the agencies.
Thank you, David. For headquarters, there are 11 procurement actions totaling $206,721,715. There are 2 non-competitive actions totaling $6,932,978. The first is a $3 million modification to a contract with Brush Industries Incorporated. It continues providing repair and refurbishment services for New York City Transit's existing MetroCard turnstile magnetic swipe read-write head assemblies. This 3-year extension is necessary until the new fare payment system will replace the MetroCard system. The second action extends a contract with Gesecki and DeVriant Currency Technology America Incorporated for maintenance services and provides upgrades to currency counters at the Consolidated Revenue Facility and the disaster recovery site. This $3.9 million 6-year extension ensures coverage by the original manufacturer. David.
A question. Are we comfortable with this $3 million modification and what we negotiated? I'm a little concerned that Brush Industries just felt that they had leverage on the MTA and are charging us an unreasonable increase to maintain this system. And I don't know if they have any other contracts with the MTA, but it kind of bothers me that it's going to cost the MTA an additional $3 million for them just to maintain what they're doing now, and they're getting paid to maintain it now, that I have to pay them an additional $3 million. It seems like they're trying to get a Christmas bonus before we implement the Omni system here, and it's I find it troubling.
That's a fair question. We're actually paying less. First off, it's an as-needed service, so we decide when they're going to get refurbished or repaired, and we're actually paying less than we were under the previous extension to the contract, which was less than we did on the one before that. So we're actually getting decreases in prices for the
Isn't
same
it good that I'm the finance chair and I know this? That's great.
But to your
So I don't think we're paying enough.
Okay, when I read it, it looked like we were,
Yeah.
so, but I'm glad you clarified.
We're paying more because there's a backlog of machines that actually need to get repaired. But on a per piece, again, we're deciding when they get repaired, and it's an as-needed basis, and we're paying less than we did under the previous.
My
under the
apologies to Brush Industries and anyone else. Commissioner Fun, do you have a question you want to?
No, I was just going to say both of those could be true. We could be paying less than we have previously, but still be getting hosed. So, but apparently we're not. So sorry, sorry for the accusation, Brush.
It's my sarcastic attitude. Any questions, other questions? Do I have a motion? Second? All those in favor? Any nays? Motion carried.
So headquarters has 8 competitive actions totaling $197,877,000. The first is a $159.2 million award to Connecticut Air Incorporated to provide health care benefits for employees of Metro-North Railroad who reside and work in Connecticut. The contract includes medical and prescription coverage. I'll mention that this actually consolidates what was covered under 2 plans previously into 1 plan. And these same employees are still able to get night shift benefits, but because they live in Connecticut, a lot of them will opt for this more Connecticut-oriented plan. We did get 6 proposals, and this was the lowest priced of the 4 proposals that were in the competitive range. The next 6 actions are modifications to contracts for executive recruitment services to support the MTA transformation plan by hiring 48 new managers. 6 firms will be engaged in these efforts for a combined amount not to exceed $2.4 million. And we're actually leveraging contracts that were awarded previously through a competitive RFP process. The board's seen this contract before. We're showing you the increase associated with the transformation plan hires and modification to rate schedules and certain aspects of the agreements, but it's still the same companies we had under retainer previously. The next item is a $36.3 million modification to extend the contract with Metropolitan Life Insurance Company for dental benefits covering non-represented employees and certain represented employees and retirees. The extension will provide time for MTA to conduct an all-agency dental benefit procurement. Headquarters has one action presented for ratification totaling $1,911,737. The action seeks ratification for an award to Guidehouse LLP in operating through a contract awarded by New York State Division of Budget. Guidehouse will provide a blueprint for MTA organizational restructuring activities, business process improvements, and cost reductions. In follow-up to recommendations provided by Alex Partners, Guidehouse will also develop an RFP for implementation services in partnership with MTA, and it was necessary for this work to commence in August in order to meet statutory timeframes.
David? So two things on these action items. One is I had a conversation with Managing Director Hakam, and she assured me, my concern is with the 6 recruiting firms, that I don't want to be paying money to firms that just send resumes of candidates that we would never hire or never get hired, that I want to pay agencies that actually come up and find really good candidates that we want to hire and do hire. So I'm going to be asking her, and she's assured me she will do this, providing me with weekly updates for the committee, and not to pay any firm that's not actually resulting in producing candidates that we hire. I just don't need somebody say, hey, look what I did. I gave you 300 resumes. There, they all suck, and we didn't hire anybody, but we paid you $250,000. If that's the way we're going to operate, I want one of those contracts. So I want that on the record, that I've been assured by Managing Director Hakam that we will not be paying for zero productivity or very low productivity with respect to finding good candidates to hire.
Duly noted, Commissioner.
The second-
And I'll add that
Right.
under these agreements, these 6 firms that are doing the work for us are required to actually work together as a team
Yeah.
and share information about the
The
people they're presenting to.
That's great. Maybe they should all go to Israel and start a kibbutz for hiring. But I'm just telling you that based on my explanation by Commissioner Hakam, there is some that are producing and there's some that are not producing, but she wanted us to keep them all there. I just want to make sure that, and she assured me going forward, she has the discretion on who to use and not use and who gets paid and who doesn't. The second one, more importantly, look, we approved the adoption of the Alex Partners plan. One of the key components of that plan was for the agency to hire a chief transformation officer. To date, that has not happened. I'm hoping that that will happen in the very, very near future. But I have a concern and a problem about us hiring and spending money on consultants or consulting organizations to implement aspects of the plan when we don't have a chief transformation officer on board yet to implement that plan. In the interest of moving things along, though other members of this committee may have a different feeling about it, the board meets on Wednesday. I will not look to seek to hold this up or table this today in finance, but unless I get really good justification, explanation from the CEO of the MTA and chair of the MTA, and a guarantee that we're not going to start implementing and paying this group money to implement the plan without first getting a CTO on board. That CTO, of course, is supposed to report directly to the board, and I think we want to have some kind of input on how things are going to get implemented and what's going to get implemented, et cetera. So when I've been told that we're running operating deficits and money's tight, this is a lot of money. I'm not saying we shouldn't spend it, but I want to see that CTO and some other key appointments hired and in place before we start hiring other people to start implementing recommendations without that individual there. Yeah, Commissioner Jones.
Along the same lines, are any of these hires going to report to the CTO? And how can you hire somebody without consultation with somebody who's going to be the leader of the team?
So speaking to the recruitment firms, they're engaged in recruitment efforts. They're not at all making hiring decisions.
Okay.
So the MTA is going to make hiring decisions, but they were engaged right away because based on the Alex Partners report, there were recommendations that we hire a certain amount so that, you know, we're if we did things in a linear way,
right,
it would just take longer than I think anybody wants to. And even the guidehouse work, I would characterize as more preparatory. They're doing some current state validation, you know, implementing a roadmap for development and helping us develop an RFP for a broad range of implementation services. So again, the object is not to change anything necessarily that was included in the Alex Partners report, or to run ahead of the new transformation office, rather to put certain building blocks in place so that they can hit the ground running.
Commissioner Vanderpool.
I appreciate that comment on the CTO and the hiring. I have a few questions of my own. With regards to the executive recruitment services, the impression I get from the staff summary is that these recruitment firms are looking externally. Is that the case? And externally outside of the MTA? Let me follow this up so I can be a little bit more. Yes. Thank you. And I asked that question because I'd like to know if we are looking internally to fill these positions. We have a very talented staff. So it does give me a little bit of pause that, or concern, quite frankly, that we're only looking externally to fill positions when we have such a talented in-house staff.
Right now, we are looking externally, but as we move forward with this transformation, we will be posting internal positions and trying to retain people. As you know, we have a potential large RIFT coming up in 2020, and we want to make sure that we retain individuals who are valuable to the MTA.
Thank you for the answer. I find that problematic, to be quite honest. I don't understand why we're not doing this concurrently. I appreciate the value of looking externally, but I don't think we should do this in phases. I think if we're looking for talent, we're looking for talent, and we're looking for it in-house, and we're looking for it externally. I don't think that we should be restricting where we're looking for this talent. My second question is with regards to the Alex RFP, or the procurement for the implementation. And this is a first for me that I've heard that we would need an additional firm to develop an implementation plan for the Alex recommendations. I would like to know why Alex cannot advise on the implementation. I thought that they were experts on reorganization and transformation. So that's not entirely clear to me. Secondly, that's a ratification, is that correct, David? The money has already been spent for...
No, the work has started. It has not already fully been spent at all.
Okay, so I have a comment related to this, but I'll pause for the answer to Alex. And why are we paying for an implementation plan? Oh, there's a follow-up question to that. These costs are, again, a surprise to me. This is $4.15 million in our operating budget related to the transformation plan. The first 2.2 related to the executive recruitment services, the remaining 1.9 related to this RFP for an implementation plan. I was not aware that there would be these associated costs on the operating side with this transformation. So related to that, how many more cost do we anticipate related to the transformation plan do we expect to come up out of our operating budget? And I ask this question for the reason that is obvious to all of us. We keep talking about a very tight operating environment, yet we found the money, $4.15 million for this, understanding that this transformation plan was mandated by state law, and the MTA is obligated to move forward as the MTA board was required to review this RFP and give it to Alex, et cetera. So this is coming from a state mandate, I understand that. But we found $4.15 million in order to accommodate these new operating expenses that were not preconceived prior to March of 2019 of this year. So how many more operating expenses do we anticipate related to this?
I think we're looking, is Mildred Chua here? I'm going to introduce Mildred Chua, should be able to address most of your questions there.
Yes. So I have been one of the project managers that's been working on the transformation plan and the whole initiative related to transformation. The Alex Partners report was done in a period of 12 weeks. So it was a very short time frame. They did put together a comprehensive plan. They addressed every aspect of the organization, but it was in a short period of time, they couldn't get to the level of detail wherein we would be able to implement recommendations. So the recommendations were stated, but we needed to do a little bit more work, a deeper dive into those recommendations. We need to put together an RFP for implementation. So the implementation phase was definitely not part of the Alex Partners report. What they put together was a blueprint, and the board approved a blueprint for transformation. So what we've done since then is we've begun to do a deeper dive internally with internal resources so that we could put together an RFP for implementation and develop all the level of detail that's needed. And that's what we're doing right now with the Guidehouse contract, is to help us put together this RFP. But you can't do an RFP without the level of detail and doing a real roadmap. So the roadmap is being done internally with internal resources, and Guidehouse is assisting us with the development of the RFP using that detail so that we can go out on the street on October 15th. So October 15th is when we expect to have a detailed roadmap that we're going to be able to present to this board, and at the same time that detail feeds into the RFP, the requirements for us to award the implementation phase of transformation.
So is Alex Partners not qualified for us to extend our contract with them to provide this level of detail? To advise on the implementation plan? Because that to me would seem like a logical next step, understanding the very tight window that Alex was operating on, again, mandated by state law. So why was there an option or a consideration given to extend this work to Alex?
I'm sorry. I'm not going to say that they were not qualified. What I would say is that the very substantial additional detailed work associated with planning and implementing the transformation that they recommended was not a part of the original scope of their contract. So, and it would be a very sizable modification to their agreement that was to add that in at this point. So the intent is to do a competitive RFP, which they could propose on, and evaluate through a formal RFP process the proposals that are received to actually implement that plan.
It seems if time is of the essence, which is what we've been talking about for quite some time, we're losing time in this process by needing to approve and reissue an RFP to an external partner. So I'm really trying to understand how we maintain the momentum here, how we actually do execute this expediency and this urgency that everyone's been talking about for quite some time. But then we have this gap here. I don't understand how it is that Alex was hired to execute this, but then not invited or discussed with to extend this. And that's, again, the impetus of these questions is, is maintaining this expediency and this urgency and this time, and relying on the firm that has drafted these recommendations, actually at this point has the most intimate expertise and experience with what is required, but yet our contract with them is not extended. Their scope has not yet been, going to be revised to include this new scope of work.
Commissioner Lin?
So I would like to, at this moment, sort of reaffirm, Larry, your position. I think the having the Chief Transformation Officer on board immediately, yesterday, is absolutely critical. I think Bob Ferran should be the strongest advocate for that, given how much of your budget and balancing your budget depends on it. I am really worried about spinning our wheels with stuff in terms of hires and in terms of decisions before the person who is responsible for making it work is on board. So I think it is critical that that person is named and on board before this stuff goes forward.
Commissioner Lacewell and then Commissioner Metzger.
Thank you, Larry. I concur in some of the remarks just made by the two prior commissioners, and I would go further to say, if we put as much energy into finding a chief transformation officer that, according to the statute, is supposed to report to this board, as we did in putting together consulting agreements and RFPs to put together plans that the chief transformation officer is supposed to be devising and overseeing and executing, we would have one by now. It's got to be job one. To my knowledge, we've had one candidate that was advanced at all, and we need to come up with candidates. It's not acceptable. And furthermore, by not doing that and proceeding in the manner that you are perhaps inadvertently usurping the role of this board under the statute, because transformation is supposed to report to the board. And it's not happening now because we don't have a chief transformation officer. And furthermore, you ought to respect and acknowledge that by coming to us before you devise these plans and come to us only to approve the money. That ain't what it's about. This is not supposed to be business as usual. We also need the chief transformation officer to help with the stability of the workforce, because the workforce would like to understand who this person is and what their attitude is going to be. And we want to be able to assure the workforce with respect to what they need to know. Second, and unrelated, one of the procurements was in connection, I believe, with an insurance company, and I just want to make it clear I'm recusing from that procurement given my position at DFS. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Duly noted.
I completely concur with the Commissioner's prior comments. You made what I think is the preemptory response. But I would like to say that I don't think this board wants to hire somebody before we've got someone for them to report to. We don't want people mucking around without clarity on the lines. The lines should come here. And we also need to understand how much it's going to cost us to implement this plan. Because I'm hearing a lot of numbers here, and that has to be part of what comes to the board. We want to save money, we don't want to spend money. And it feels like mumbo-bumbo here. We're just not getting clarity in what your process is. Frankly, at the rate we are going, it's taking us longer than it took Alex Partners to make their report. Well, this is unacceptable. So.
Thank you, Commissioner. So, look, I'm not here to shoot the messenger. So here's what I'd like to do. Again, it would be helpful and wise to have a chief transformation officer actually involved in the drafting of any RFP that is needed to successfully complete a transformation plan. So it is important that that person be on board so they have input as to how these things get shaped. What I would ask the committee members to provide their indulgement is I want to give Pat Foy the opportunity to have a conversation with him and see what answers he will provide all members of the board between now and Wednesday. Maybe he will agree to pull this agenda item until the next board meeting, and hopefully we'll have a chief transformation officer by then. But since he is not here at the table, and there may be things that we are all not aware of, I want to at least give him the next 24 to 48 hours to provide whatever answers and explanations he can. If they're not, either he'll agree to pull it, or he'll come up with answers that everyone can hear, and then we'll go from there whether or not we still want to approve the item at the full board meeting or table it. So I would ask, unless anyone has any other questions, Commissioner Albert?
Maybe Maggie is the right person for this, but has anybody stated how close we are to the CTO being hired?
We're
Is there one or more
simultaneously an inch and a
candidates?
mile away. Is that a good answer? Okay.
That's what I was afraid to say.
They're not there until they're there, is what I would probably, the way I would answer you. But with that, if there are no other questions, and with that all stated on the record, can I have a motion? Second? I'll second it. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carried. David?
Okay,
Finish
so-
here. I know you're shell-shocked, but keep going.
For Metro North, there is a request for an authorizing resolution seeking board approval to use a competitive RFP process for the design build of 3 traction power substations at Metro North's Golden Bridge, Croton Falls, and Katona stations.
Any questions? Do I have a motion? Second? I'll second it. All those in favor? Opposed?
For Long Island Railroad, there's an authorizing resolution seeking board approval to utilize a competitive RFP process to replace the Ocean Avenue substation with an option to replace the Belmore substation.
Any questions? I'll make the motion. Do I have a second? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
So New York City Transit has 4 procurement actions totaling $525,601,245. There are 2 non-competitive procurements totaling $7 million. The first requests ratification of a $3.6 million award to Turtle and Hughes for a SAG corrector service agreement. The award was made pursuant to a declaration of immediate operating need to assure the reliable and consistent supply of power to the signal system. The second item requests ratification of a $3.4 million modification to a contract with New Flyer of America for technical changes to enhance the bus emissions profile and customer amenities and to improve various mechanical and electrical systems on articulated compressed natural gas buses.
Questions? I'll make a motion to approve. Do I have a second? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Still with New York City Transit, there are 2 competitive procurements for a total of $518.7 million. The first is a request for an authorizing resolution to utilize a competitive RFP process to select multiple contractors for on-call structural repairs and debris protection installations for an aggregate amount of $500 million. The last item for New York City Transit requests ratification of an $18.7 million modification to a contract with LK Comstock and Company for the replacement of 2 double crossovers and 2 single crossovers within the Kings Highway interlocking on the Culver Line in Brooklyn.
Questions? I'll make a motion to approve. Second? All those in favor? Motion carried.
So there are 3 competitive procurements for bridges and tunnels totaling $172,097,683. First, there's an award of an as-needed miscellaneous construction contract to 14 firms in the not-to-exceed amount of $120 million. Work will be assigned by the issuance of competitive task awards. The next action is a $47.8 million award to Judlaw Contracting Incorporated for design-build services for a new Harlem River Drive connector ramp. In connection with this award, approval is also sought to pay stipends totaling $150,000 to 2 unsuccessful proposers. And there's one last item, Mr. Chairman. The last action proposed by Bridges and Tunnels is a $4.3 million modification to a contract with Thornton Tomasetti Incorporated to add design and construction phase support services for Project TN53, the rehabilitation and seismic retrofit of the approach viaducts and rehabilitation of the lower garage at the Throgs Neck Bridge.
I just want to again put on the record, I ask Bob if you would speak to our general counsel, Tom Quigley, on this, because I have said publicly, and on the record. I want to make sure we have a state debarment law on the books. I want to make sure Judd Lau, who has a lot of contracts with this organization, that they are not fall within the debarment law on any of those contracts before we continue to award them additional contracts. So I would like to know that prior to Wednesday's board meeting. So if we need to pull this agenda item, we can do it. All right? So any other questions? I'll make a motion. Do I have a second? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
So there are no actions for FemTech, and this concludes the procurements. Back to David Keller.
This month's MTA consolidated financial and operational reports are on pages 95 to 242. It includes June, July, and August results versus the mid-year forecast. It also includes a 12-month allocation, 2019 mid-year forecast, and the last agenda item is David Florio with real estate.
Thank you. The agenda is on page 243.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a quick question unrelated to Mr. Florio's report? I noticed in this series of ratifications that there were no EO 168 ratifications this time around. Does that suggest that the EO has been lifted? Where are we with the EO?
There are certainly no actions. If I'm correct, it actually was renewed, but we're simply not bringing any actions for EO 168. Sure.
There are 6 action items. The first 2 are non-exclusive fiber optic lease amendments, one for Metro North along its Hudson right-of-way, the other is for Long Island Railroad along its Montauk and Central branches. The next 2 items are acquisitions in support of the Long Island Railroad's capital and operational needs. For New York City Transit, there is a lease for a delicatessen and grocery store at Myrtle Avenue Station. And lastly, for the MTA, we have a renewal of our lease for MTA Government Affairs in Albany. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
I'll make a motion to approve. Second? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. We done?
That's the full agenda, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Okay, I'm going to make a motion to adjourn. Second? All right. All those in favor? Aye. This meeting's adjourned.